By all outward appearances, Ryan White looked like any other high school kid. He was a bit lanky and awkward. He boasted a shock of sometimes wild hair. And he loved being active, riding his skateboard, playing sports. On the outside, Ryan looked completely normal. But life had also dealt Ryan a very tough hand. When he was a young child, he was diagnosed with hemophilia, so that the smallest cut would start bleeding profusely. On occasion, he needed blood transfusions, which in the early 1980s were not well screened. In 1984, Ryan suddenly became very ill with pneumonia, and the illness progressed in ways that surprised and worried doctors. And so they ran tests. They did follow-up examinations. They poked and they prodded and they studied microscopes and they consulted with other experts. In time, Ryan was diagnosed with a new and largely unknown malady, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or as it would have become known to the world, AIDS. HIV/AIDS had only just begun to be identified in medical literature a couple of years earlier, and very little was known about the terrible illness that was beginning to ravage communities all over the country and the world. Ryan White was given 6 months to live. But he did live. The next summer, as the school year was beginning, Ryan suddenly started feeling better. He had miraculously improved. He appeared to be in good health. Moreover, the scientific consensus had advanced, and doctors now understood that AIDS could not be passed by airborne particles or physical contact. And so Ryan White wanted the same things that all children want: to be normal, to be included, to have a regular life. And so he and his parents decided that they were going to go back to school this year. But the school and most of the parents disagreed. In June of 1985, the superintendent of schools denied Ryan's petition to return to class. And so instead, he listened to his classes from home over a shaky telephone connection. His parents continued to pressure the school district, arguing that there was no medical reason for Ryan to be prohibited from attending in person. In response, 117 parents and 50 teachers, this in a school of just over 300 people, signed a petition asking school board members to ban Ryan from school permanently. They unanimously obliged. That winter, the New England Journal of Medicine published research showing that close contact with people with AIDS posed minimal or even non-existent risk of infection. It didn't matter. Science didn't matter. Reason didn't matter. Emotion, extremism ruled the day. As officials continued to fight one another in the courts, Ryan went back to school for one day in February. And as news spread, nearly half the student body stayed home rather than be in the same building with him. People who had been their friends and neighbors just months before began to curse the White family and attack them verbally on the streets. Ryan, who worked as a paper boy, he had a paper route, and many of his clients canceled their newspaper subscriptions because they didn't want to touch newsprint that he had thrown to their front porch. Friends and neighbors told the White family that Ryan's disease was God's judgment on their 14-year-old son. When Ryan was eventually readmitted to school that spring, a large group of parents left the school entirely to form an alternative school, one that Ryan was not allowed to attend. And the school he did attend wasn't that much better. He was forced to eat with disposable utensils, to use a separate bathroom from everyone else, to not engage in any gym activities. His family started receiving death threats. That year, someone drove by their home and shot bullets through the front of their window. The harassment and threats of violence finally became too much, and the White family had to leave their small town. But Ryan had also become something of a minor celebrity. His cause picked up by those who cared about the AIDS epidemic and the stigmas that had harmed so many people with the disease. Elton John and Michael Jackson, among many others, took a personal interest in his case. He went on a speaking tour and appeared on talk shows and made media appearances to advocate against the stigmatization of AIDS patients. Ryan White died in 1990 at the age of 18. He had outlived the doctor's predictions by 5 full years. I want to share that very true and very painful story with you this morning because I want to give you an example of the ways in which fear of the unknown, fear of what we don't understand, fear of people who are different than us can lead to mob violence, to hatred, to judgmentalness. But I also believe that there is an even deeper issue at play than fear. And I think that that is the false idol of purity. In the gospel today, Jesus gives us one of the most profound lessons about morality, about Christian ethics that exists almost anywhere in Scripture. But it's also a lesson that I think isn't well understood or heard even today. So Jesus, as happens many times in the Gospel of Mark, we were just seeing this actually in our reading group before the service, Jesus is being challenged by the religious know-it-alls of his day about the issue of washing hands. Now, I realize that if you take this at literal face value, you're probably going to side with the Pharisees on this issue, right? I mean, shouldn't people wash their hands before eating? Kind of makes sense. Yes, they should. Let's affirm that. But the reasons that the Pharisees are obsessing over Jesus and his disciples' lack of hand washing has nothing to do with hygiene. That's not what they're interested in at all. You have to keep in mind this is many, many centuries, millennia, before we knew about germ theory. They are not interested in hygiene. The washing wasn't done primarily for those purposes. The washing of hands, the washing of plates and cups and other things was done for reasons of ritual purity. Ritual purity. See, the religious people of Jesus' day practiced elaborate ritual ablutions, that is, washings, that were not so much about cleanliness as they were about making themselves spiritually and ritually pure in order to participate in the temple. The rites, the sacrifices that happened in the temple, you had to be pure to enter that temple space. This purity then disallowed them from associating with people who they thought were impure. Once you were pure, you don't want to touch people who have been impure, right? It'll stain your sense of purity. That's why the holy rollers in the story of the Good Samaritan, the man who's left dying by the side of the road, right? They don't want to touch a bruised and blooded body laying by the side of the road, because to do that, to touch any kind of blood at all, for example, in the Torah law, was to make yourself impure. And so they don't help the man, right, who's lying on the side of the street beaten up by robbers. In this case, in Jesus' case, in this conversation that we hear this morning, the religious self-righteousness brigade is criticizing Jesus and his followers for not following the purity codes that they themselves had invented in order to stay ritually pure. They ask him, why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? And by the way, notice the subtext there. They're telling Jesus and his disciples that they are impure, that they are defiled by not keeping those practices. And Jesus, with force and prophetic power, rejects the notion of purity entirely. Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile. It's the things that come out that are what defile. It's from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come. And he gives several examples. These evil things come from within, and they defile a person. Now, I think this is a very important Christian teaching. Because quite radically for his own time, Jesus rejects the entire concept of purity based on what people consume or what they bring into themselves. Jesus violated that code all the time. We are not less pure because we have a disease, Jesus says. Remember that Jesus touched and healed lepers, people who were considered to be impure, outcasts, outsiders. We're not less pure because of who we are. Remember that Jesus met with and healed non-Jews and even pagans in his ministry. We're not less pure because of who we associate with. Remember that Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus says to the Pharisees, by the way, it's the tax collectors and the prostitutes who are going to go to heaven ahead of you. Talking to the Pharisees. We're not less pure because of what we eat or what we wear or what movies we watch or the music we listen to. I got that a lot when I was growing up in South Carolina. Those aren't the kind of things that make us impure. What is it that defiles a person according to Jesus Christ? It's what comes out of a person. It's their words and their actions. It's their behavior, especially toward others. Words of hate, words of oppression, words of slander, words of segregation and separation, and actions, theft, murder, greed, adultery, pride. We're given many examples. Here, as he also does in Luke chapter 11, Jesus rejects the entire concept of spiritual purity. Each and every person is made by God and is loved by God. And each and every person is sacred. And we are also equally in need of God's grace and forgiveness and mercy. What defiles us, according to Jesus, is to disrespect, to dehumanize, and to demean others or even yourself as a child of God. Our systems of purity, folks, don't actually make us more pure. A great example of this, I love Nadia Bolz-Weber, a Lutheran pastor, gives a great example of this. She talks about prohibition. 100 years ago, there were people that were so concerned about whether other folks were drinking alcohol that they amended the Constitution. That's a big deal. They amended the Constitution to keep anyone in this country from drinking alcohol. Did that stop people from drinking alcohol? No. And you know what it did? It made Al Capone a lot richer. Because when alcohol is illegal, you can sell it for 2, 3, 4, 10 times the price. Our systems of purity, according to Bolz-Weber, don't actually make us more pure. What they often do is they make us hypocrites. What they do is to deliver that sweet and powerful drug of choice that some people crave above all other drugs, the drug of self-righteousness. The kind of drug that allows us to pretend that we are somehow better than other people, less pure people, People with a speck in their eye, while we ignore the 2x4 in our own. The blinding log of pride, of ego, of self-aggrandizement, to borrow another image that Jesus uses. Who do you think was impure in the story that I began with today? Was Ryan White impure? Was anyone with AIDS impure because of their illness? Absolutely not. I have no doubt that Jesus would have embraced them, held them, comforted them, but I can say with absolute certainty that the people who harassed Ryan and so many others, who bullied him, who sent death threats to his family, who shot bullets through the windows of his home, those people defiled themselves by virtue of hateful actions, by virtue of judgmentalness, by means of smug, self-assured self-righteousness. Jesus calls this being a whitewashed tomb. That's the image that Jesus uses for that. True religion, on the other hand, true religion, undefiled, religion that is actually pure, according to the Apostle James in his letter to us today, is to care for orphans and widows in their distress. That is, to make positive and concrete change for good in the world around us. To serve others, and in doing that, to serve Christ as well. I don't think that Jesus cared one iota about whether or not people were pure. I came not for the righteous, Jesus said, I came for sinners. I do think, though, that Jesus cared a great deal about people's actions, about the fruits that they bore through the grace of God, about whether or not their words and deeds reflected a God who, as Jesus' own mother said, casts down the mighty from their thrones and lifts up the lowly. Put another way, I think that if we seek purity above all else, whatever that looks like, if we seek purity, we often end up with self-righteousness, with pride, with judgmentalness. If we seek service, if we seek justice, we will end up with humility, with acceptance, with love. And I believe with the true righteousness that comes from God alone. Holy God, only you are pure, and only you are holy. Give us the grace to practice true religion, loving, serving, and caring for those in need and those in our community, and by serving them, to serve you. In your holy name.